The topic of today is going to be talking about the DVX snapshots and the Snap Store and how we're utilizing that for immutable backups. Again, a lot of what we're talking about in our marketing and our current sales presentations are around using DVX for ransomware recovery. And I know that some of you who have been with me for the 3 years I've been at Datrium have definitely heard a different pitch for why you should buy DVX. But it's one of those things where, hey, you know what? This is in the product. It's no additional cost. Everything we're talking about today is all part of base DVX, which every single one of you own and have the entitlements to. So everything we're talking about today is in your data center. So as we kind of go through that, the way that we view enterprise data protection is that it should be consistent of a few things, right? It should be a VM granular policy. So it should be something that is not just easy to manage, but it should be based on a VM. It shouldn't necessarily be based on a LUN or a VMDK or a data store or anything like that, because we manage as VMware admins, we manage virtual machines, right? That's our unit of management usually is the VM, and so we want to make sure that when we're creating these protection groups that we're doing it at the VM level. The second piece is of course the Snap Store. So having a backup, a place to back up all my data that's going to be secure, but it also needs to be searchable, right? So it needs to be somewhere where I can look through one site and I can see all of my backups at all of my sites, so that I can go through and I can actually recover from any point in time. And then of course, granular operations, right? We want to be able to go from the protection group and restore an entire protection group, like you would in kind of like a DR failover, to being able to restore a single VM like you would in a traditional, failed VM recovery effort, to be able to restore within the VM. And we're going to talk about the VSS, because I know that we've talked about it a lot, that it's something we can do, but I don't think it's something that you guys have actually seen us do. And a lot of you have not actually implemented VSS. So I want to talk about that as well today. But being able to get down into the VM and actually be able to recover guest files. So to us, what is a snapshot? We use that term a lot, and I know because when I was a customer, I felt the same. I felt the same way. When we hear the word snapshot, we think VMware snapshot, and everybody gets scared because everybody's had that VMware snapshot that's broken a VM. Everybody's had that VMware snapshot that's caused a performance issue. Everybody's had that Veeam snapshot that broke the rest of their backup chain. And so when we say snapshot, it gets really scary. But really, what we're just saying is that a VMware snapshot is a point in time that we're taking a snapshot of the data of a VM at a storage level. We are not a VMDK, a LUN, a parent, child chain, any of that, right? It's its own separate thing, and that's where we kind of get into. That's kind of where we get into this next piece, which is what is the Snap Store, right? How do we actually use it, and what is it? So the first thing to understand is that in the DVX, you have kind of two pieces to your storage. It's all just grouped together in one presentation of storage. And if you're logging into your own DVX right now to maybe follow along a little bit, you know that on the dashboard tab, you can see the split. If you go to DVX system and then you go to the real-time sub-tab, you can see that split of active data versus your Snap Store data, right? And if you think of the Snap Store the same way that you think of a backup server, right? That's really what that Snap Store is. It's holding the backup data. The NFS data store is where your VMs are. And again, as we all know, it's not actually NFS, but it presents to VMware as NFS. So this is just a good way to kind of post that here. But basically, these two things live in the same globally deduped log structured file system within the DVX. but the snap store is never presented to ESXi. It's never presented to the host. In fact, it's never presented anywhere. It is basically a logical container that we manage through the log structured file system, which is part of how this is all immutable. Of course, the second piece to how this is all immutable is the log structured file system is a write once, read many. So we're always writing new data to new white space. We've got the catalog, which is our SnapDB. So that is all of the snapshots, all the points in time, all the retention policies, everything that again would normally be in your catalog, your catalog in a backup server. That's our SnapDB. SnapDB is also replicated to let us know what snaps exist on what remote systems. So that's again how we can, from a single system, we can look globally to find where the data could be recovered from if it can't be recovered locally. We have the protection groups, which are your backup policies. We have the backups themselves, which are the individual snapshots of the VMs. And then, of course, the backup array, right? So the data node kind of does two jobs. It's your primary storage, but then it's also what holds your backup storage. It's what holds all your replication. So if you're thinking, very traditional 3-2-1 type backup architecture, this is some good kind of translation of a backup term to kind of how Datrium applies that. Okay. So when we talk about a VM, we look at a VM as being a list of files that are all associated to the same UUID. And then each of those files has its own individual blocks, and each of those blocks have their own individual fingerprint. So that's why our write process is fingerprint, then compress, then encrypt, then erase your code, then dedupe. Is because of how we do file handling. And again, it's how we're so efficient on the dedupe. It's how we're able to do encryption while still being deduplicated. But again, a file is just a bunch of blocks. A block has a unique hash. Okay. When we talk about what a Datrium snapshot is, what a snapshot is basically it's saying, hey, we understand that this VM is made up of these files that are made up of these blocks that have these hashes. Okay, so this is my 1201 snapshot. If I take another snapshot here, there we go, for snap 2 at 1216 and then snap 3 at 1231, you'll notice I've got some change block in that, right? So I still have a lot of like block that hasn't changed, but now I have these individual change blocks. We handle each of these snapshots as their own synthetic full. So these have no chaining relationship to each other at all. They're just their own individual synthetic fulls, right? So the idea being that when snap 1 goes away, snap 2 doesn't have this whole consolidation effort it needs to do. It's just maintaining the retention on those blocks further out because it's part of a different snap. So that's how when we talk about having multiple VMs that have multiple snaps happening at the same time, again, this is how we're able to logically look at those as a bunch of different snaps, even though under the covers they're all the same data, right? This is how we do no storage penalty snapshots. This is why your snap store is only the delta of the data that's in the active data set, right? So hopefully this kind of explains a little better how we're doing these snaps and how this works under the covers so that we can then kind of talk about what we do from here, right? Okay. So with that, again, synthetic fulls and then replication, of course, happens between site and between cloud. And I don't have the next slide for that, so that's fine. So we'll just kind of talk about it. So when replication happens between prem and cloud, what we actually do, which is kind of cool, when we do the replication, is that we copy the snapshot. So we copy the last snap that existed of that data to a new snap at the remote site, and then we do a metadata compare from site A to site B to say, okay, site A, what are your blocks? Site B, what are your blocks? And that's how we figure out what blocks are missing at site B. And then we replace the blocks in that cloned snap at site B with the blocks from site A. So we're going to do kind of another training on replication and best practices around replication. Today, we're really just focusing on creating snapshots and some best practices around them. But it is kind of cool to know that this architecture is how we were able to do the efficiency through replication. And it's also how we were able to do the efficiency on the egress coming back out of Cloud DVX, so that you're not moving your entire data set. You're only moving the things that you need. So with that, we're going to swap over into my DVX, and we're going to start talking about creating protection groups and then some best practices that I've learned in the field, working with you guys, some best practices that some other SEs have learned in the field, working with their customers, and that way we can all kind of understand what's going on here. So again, this is my DVX that's running in our demo lab in Sunnyvale, California. You'll notice again down here, I've got some total capacity, and then I've got my snap store capacity. And this is also something I just want to bring up for those that are not aware. Anything in our interface that is green, you can hover over, and it'll explain kind of what that metric is, or what that setting does, or whatever you're hovering over, it'll explain. So if you haven't seen that before, it's something kind of cool. The second thing that I'll let you guys know is that this is the 5.1.2 firmware. So this is our very, very latest firmware. There is nothing in here that you can't do in the 4.1 and newer firmwares. So as long as you're on at least 4.1.1.0, everything in 4.1.1.0, 5.0, and 5.1 is going to be the same kind of best practices, the same way to do these operations. Not much has changed there. Control Shift is new to 5.0 and 5.1. We're not going to go through Control Shift today. And then 5.1 has some new replication topology considerations. And again, we're not going to go through those today. We're going to go through those next week's session when we talk about replication and disaster recovery. But yeah, so just so you know, that's kind of what we're working with. So to create a protection group, I can come in here and I can create my group. Okay, so we've got a bunch already created. If I want to create a new group, I can do that here. The one thing to know is that you are limited on your total number of protection groups. You can have up to 64 groups in a DVX. So don't get super crazy with breaking everything out. And then within those groups, we don't have a limit to number of VMs that can be in a single group. Each group can support up to 2,000 snapshots. So I can have 2,000 individual recovery points associated per protection group, with a total of 1.2 million snapshots in the entire DVX cluster. So that's not only the local groups, that's any inbound replication, as well as any manual snapshots that you take of VMs outside of protection groups. Again, it's a lot of snaps. For those of you who have less than 100 VMs, I'd be very surprised if you ever hit it. For those of you that have under 5,000 VMs, you might, if you're getting real aggressive. And as far as I know, no one on this call has over 5,000 VMs, so we don't need to worry about that. So when I think about creating my protection groups, the way that I usually create them, every one of you that I've done an install for has an all_VMs protection group, and that protection group usually will look like this. So it's set to data store 1. It has a star here, and the star will go out and it will find every VM in the environment, and it will add it to this protection group. And then usually I'll come to the second tab and I'll do 4-hour snapshots here. So I'll do a midnight, a 4, an 8, a noon, a 4, and an 8. And I do 4-hour snaps, and I usually keep these for like 3 days. Okay. This is up until very recently, this was the same PG that I created for everybody. It's the PG that I created at Altair when I was first deploying Datrium there. And this works really well because it ensures that even if you never go back and set another protection group up, if you forget to do it or get busy or whatever, it ensures that you've got at least some level of recovery. So that if you do get hit by something, you at least have one recovery point to go back to. And it's usually not more than 4 hours away, so that, you know, again, you're not losing a ton of data. And this group usually does not create a lot of overhead in the Snap Store, so it doesn't really take up a lot of space to do this group. So this is the one that I create, again, like I said, up until recently. What changed my mind recently is I would create the star pattern, and then I would exclude, using a bang, my VCSA, my vCenter server. Now, why would you exclude your vCenter server? You want to back that up. Well, a couple reasons. One, this protection group policy, that's too aggressive for my vCenter server. I don't know of anybody who has such a high change rate in their vCenter server that they need to back it up every hour. Daily is usually more than enough to be able to back up and successfully recover a vCenter server. But here's the second reason. If I recover a protection group, because I want to recover all the VMs in this protection group to the same microsecond in time, I can select that and I can click recover. And you'll notice on the recovery step, the first thing that it's telling you to do is you have to power off these VMs. Well, if I want to recover my entire environment, because my entire Windows environment, because it got hit by ransomware, or we pushed out a patch, or maybe we pushed out something through SCCM, and I just hosed my entire Windows environment, and I got to roll it back to a point in time, I don't need to touch my vCenter server. So it'd be a lot easier if I could leave vCenter up, power off all the VMs, recover that one VM, recover that one protection group of all my VMs, and then just power back on all the recovered VMs, all doing it through vCenter. If I have vCenter in that PG, I have to shut it down, which means that I either have to shut down vCenter, come into, leave the internal Datrium management, right, in vCenter, and I have to actually go to the dedicated Datrium management IP. And I have to do my same recovery from here. Now, of course, the upside is if vCenter is broken and I can't get into vCenter, then I can come here and I could recover my vCenter VM and recycle it, and it would be all good. But if I've got my vCenter VM in my all VMs PG and I want to recover my all VMs PG, I'd have to come here. I'd have to recover it. I'd have to then go power on the vCenter VM, wait for it to boot, wait for the services to initialize, and then go power on all of my actual guest VMs. So that's going to add some time to my recovery. And in a situation where I may have already blown my maintenance window and I don't have time to recover, like everyone's breathing down my neck, that's one less thing I have to do, right? And then same thing, if I want to be able to recover just that VCSA, I could come in and I could recover it from there. The second kind of consideration when I'm creating protection groups is, again, think about application groups that you might have to recover all the servers in an application group at exactly the same time. So if I have to recover, maybe I have a SQL environment, and I would need to recover all of my always on members of an AG to the same point in time so that I don't have database discrepancies. Maybe I've got a web app that's got a bunch of application servers that instead of having centralized shared storage, they just do constant replication of data or constant replication of configuration between them. And it would be really important for me to be able to restore all those VMs at the same point in time. So that's a good reason to group VMs together when you're creating your snap schedules. Third thing, when creating snap schedules, most customers do kind of a gold, silver, and bronze tier kind of like you do with your backups. So your gold tier are like your hourlies and they're replicating everywhere. Your silvers are like maybe your 4 hours and they're replicating only daily. And then your bronze are doing, you know, once a day and they're replicating on that daily. So it gives you that ability to kind of split those out. That really tails well into control shift. And again, we're going to talk more about that next week when we talk about building protection groups for control shifting considerations. But really today we're just focusing on, you know, local backups and local replication. The third thing to consider is VSS. And so if I want VSS in a protection group, there are a couple limitations that we have to be aware of. The first is that Datrium has a limitation of 20 VSS enabled VMs in a single protection group. So if I come in here and I want to, let's call it test, and I want to add a VSS VM, I can only select up to 20 at a time. So by default, all of our snapshots are crash consistent. So if I just type in a search pattern here, and I were to use any VMs that start with my initials, these are all going to be crash consistent snapshots, which is fine for most things, but for SQL, for Exchange, it's not fine. And we need application consistent snapshots. So the way that we do that is we come into the select VMs and we find the VMs that we want. So even though technically these SQL VMs are already specified by the dynamic VM pattern, I can come in here, manually specify them, and I can click use VSS. Now, if I have use VSS enabled, you'll notice that on SQL 01, it's green check mark, it's good to go. SQL 02, it's letting me know, hey, the driver is not installed, the driver is not running, the services are, something's happening, right? It's letting me know you know, it's not there, you need to fix this. So to fix that, I would go and I would install the Datrium SQL VSS package on SQL 02. And it's really easy to do. All I need to do is come to my DVX, the management interface. I don't even need to log in, but at the very bottom here, you'll notice that we have the VSS agent for download, and then we have the SRA agent for download. And again, we'll talk more about SRA when we talk about disaster recovery, but just know that if you do have SRM in your environment, you can get the SRA plugin from right here to use with Datrium. But I can download this VSS agent. Again, it's just an MSI, and it allows me to do that install either as a one-click on my SQL servers, so I can just log in and I can do that one click, or it allows me to do it because again, it is an MSI package. I could put this in vSphere Update Manager, and I could create a guest update package that I could push out to all my guests and install the MSI. I could create an SCCM package if I've got, you know, something like if I've got something like Marimba or, you know, any other Windows package manager, I can push it out like that as well. So again, this is going to be your SQL. This is going to be your Exchange. This is going to be Active Directory. This is going to be SharePoint. Basically, SQL-based servers. It will work with the files, the Microsoft File Server VSS plugin. So if you've got the Microsoft VSS writer for their file servers installed, we do see that as a valid writer, and we can utilize that as well. But you do need to have the VSS package installed. It's a very easy install to do, and it's all good. So once I have, you know, once I've got my VM selected for VSS, again, we have a maximum of 20 that we can have in a single protection group. My personal recommendation is actually significantly less than that, and here's why. When we do a VSS Quiesce of the VM, it's the same VSS Quiesce that you would do if you were using Veeam, if you were using Quest, if you were using Rubrik, any VSS that's going to go get your Exchange or your SQL servers is going to do a Quiesce, and then it's going to create the snapshot, and then it's going to go back up all that VSS data. So we wait for all of that to happen, right? So the snapshot, the Datrium piece happens instantaneously. The VSS piece takes a while. If you have more than about 4 to 6 VSS VMs in a single protection group, I have seen multiple cases where VSS will time out, and basically it'll time out on the data transmission and it fails the snapshot. So you have a crash consistent snapshot, you just don't have a VSS consistent snapshot. I've seen that. I've seen I've seen write latency issues because basically VMs are sending a ton of VSS data over the network, um, over the data network, and it can create write latency issues. I've also seen issues where the VSS stun across all the VMs, for instance, in a SQL database, where you've got multiple members of the same AG, all VSS stunning at the same time, have actually caused database drops. Again, these are VSS problems. These aren't Datrium problems. So this really applies to any backup software that you're doing, but it is just something to keep in mind that we don't stagger when we kick the VSS Quiesce off. We do it instantaneously for all the VMs in the group. And so if you have more than 4 to 6, it's potential that you could cause some performance issues. So just something to keep in mind. And again, I don't know of anybody on this call that has a ton of SQL servers that would really exceed that. But just as you're planning for VSS, it is something to know. The next thing is, of course, our scheduling. And you know, as you all know, we can do 5-minute RPO. We actually put 10-minute in the GUI now. You get a nice warning about how if you do this every 10 minutes, it's very possible that you're going to fill up your space really quickly if you've got high change rate VMs. So just keep that in mind. But half hourly, hourly, and then every 4 hours, dailies, weeklies, monthlies. So we kind of took all the most common, RPOs that we found through ASUP. So we look at all of your ASUP data, and that's one of the proactive analytics that we're doing is we're looking at how people are doing protection groups and what their RPOs are within those protection groups. And then we just put the most common ones as easy clickable things here. So usually what I'll do is I'll do, do my 4 hourly snapshots or do my hourlies. And I usually keep these for 24 hours. And then I'll do a daily. I usually keep that for 14 days. And then I do a weekly, and I usually keep my weeklies for 4 weeks. And then if I want beyond a month, if I want beyond 30 days of retention, I'll add a monthly here, and I'll keep these for however many months. Usually I do 90 days of retention. So this is a pretty good way to roll up your snaps. This will give you some pretty granular recovery, and the really easy math on this exact plan that we've, again, found through our own calculations. If you take your data set that you want to back up and you multiply it by 1.55, you will get roughly almost exactly the amount of total data that would be consumed. So for every terabyte that you're backing up, we're assuming that there's going to be this schedule at the full 90 days of retention. For every terabyte you're backing up, there's an additional 550 gigs of snapshot data on the system for every raw terabyte, using the 24 hours, the 14 days, 4 weeks, and 3 months. So not a lot of space to give up to be able to hold 90 days of retention in your on-prem DVX. Obviously, if you have high rates of change, that will be different. But this is a pretty good schedule. Of course, each of these has its ability to replicate, and we can specify the site as well as the retention period. And then if you have overlapping where maybe I want to send to my DR DVX and I want to keep that for 14 days, but I want to do a daily and I want to send this out to my cloud DVX, oops, change that. And instead of holding for 14 days, I want to hold that for 14 months. I want daily points for a little over a year. Maybe I've got a crazy compliance officer, or I've got, a customer request that, one of my end user customers needs something crazy. Well, I could throw it out to Cloud DVX where the storage is cheaper than the on-prem DVX, and I can hold that differently. So these two daily points will be the same logical point in the system. We're just replicating them to two different places, and we're setting the retention schedule at those different places differently in accordance with what I need for my SLA. So now that I have a protection group, right, let's look at actually monitoring these protection groups. So there's a few ways that we can do that, right? Of course, the GUI is one. The second place that we can monitor whether or not my protection groups are happening, right, or my protection snapshots are happening, right? I can look in the GUI and I can check, and I'll get, if I've got an error, right, in any of them, it will show up in alarms. So it'll let me know that I've got a PG that's failing. It'll let me know that I've got a PG that's falling behind. It will send me an email if I have a failed PG, right? So if I've gone into configure DVX here, and I have actually configured my SMTP settings as well as recipients of the alerts, I'll get those emails. I will get emails from support if I've got enough warnings going on, or if I've got a PG that's fallen behind far enough in replication, I'll get a notification from Datrium support that something's going on. But what if I'm somebody that is SOC 2 Type 2, and I have to prove that I do nightly backups, and coming into a protection group and just taking a snapshot, taking a screenshot of the PG, or even coming into events and taking screenshots of the events pages are not good enough. What if I needed an actual daily report emailed to me? Well, we can do that by enabling that through the CLI. So this is not something that you can do through the GUI. You have to do it through the CLI, and I can provide you the exact command. It's also in the user guide. But basically, what you do is you enable for all snapshots. So it's an all on or all off function, but you enable snapshot reporting through the CLI. It's a single command that you issue, and it goes against every protection group in the organization, and it will email to the configured recipients list under configured DVX. So that's again why, if you want that to happen, you need to have your SMTP server set up, and then you need to have your recipients configured correctly under configured DVX. But we do have that ability to send out, as they're happening, all of the reports for the Datrium snapshots, so that you can see success or failure. And again, you can log those in either your service desk, whatever you're using for your ticketing system. Maybe you're using ServiceNow as a CMS, and you want them to go there. All things that are possible, right? So those are, as we're trying to monitor our protection groups, those are the ways that we usually do it. In my case, again, when I was working at Altair, the way that I usually did it was I just logged into DVX every morning just to do kind of an overall status check. If there was an issue with a PG, there'd be a little triangle on the protection group tab, and I'd come take a look at it, usually go to the alerts tab and figure out, okay, what's going on, what was the problem. The individual protection group will have a little exclamation on it, so I can figure out exactly which protection group was having an issue. But it makes it pretty easy through the GUI. But again, not everything that you guys do we expect to happen through the GUI. So that's where enabling the alerts through the CLI can be very helpful. The second thing around monitoring that we can do is, of course, looking at the unique size and the total size of my protection groups. So the way that this works, the total size is the total size of the data set that is on the DVX. So if I had to replicate this protection group into a completely empty DVX, that is how much space I would need. The total size is how much space I need on the remote DVX to do it. And then on the local DVX, it's the combination of the active data and the unique data to come up with the total, right? So these are telling me with the base data set and the change, how much I'm taking. The unique size is how much extra space I'm taking in the DVX to hold my backups. So in this case, you'll notice that the very top one, this was a protection group that we set up and then we deleted all the VMs in. So the backups are still here, but the unique size is the full size because those VMs actually don't exist in the data store anymore. If I start looking down further, so if I look at like my all VMs that I create, I have 410 gigs of used space total, but I only have about 100 gigs of backups associated with my VM. So even though I've got 23 snapshots covering 13 VMs, I'm only using about 100 gigs because I just don't have that much change rate. So that's also something that as you're creating these to be aware of is just monitoring these unique sizes. The unique sizes are also really helpful when you're trying to determine if you've been hit by ransomware, if you've been hit by, or if someone maybe just dumped a bunch of data onto a file server, anything like that. If you want to know when a large data change occurred in your environment, you can actually come in to the summary of the snapshot. You can see all the individual snapshots that are going on there, and you can see total size, the effective size with DD compression, and then of course, the individual uniques. So in my case, you can see down at this very bottom one, I had a lot of change happen that day. I was probably doing some installation and some SQL database work. And since then, I really haven't done much in the environment, so I don't have a lot of change going on. You guys will be able to normalize that change. Here's another interesting thing about these, and I'm going to put out probably an accompanying blog post on this to give you a better example to steal. But this unique size, this total size, these are all available through our API. So both through the CLI and through the API, you can get this data. And one of the things that we have kind of shown internally as a proof of concept, and we're kind of working through getting into the product at some point, but I can offer to you guys kind of now because it's just querying your own data. But if you have a tool like Logic Monitor or Grafana or you've got your own custom dashboards in like Nagios or PRTG, where you could basically query on a constant basis. You could query these snapshots and what their total and their effectives are, or sorry, what their totals and their uniques are. You can graph and normalize your growth over time, and then create alarms for outliers. So if your data grows more than say 15% on a single day, something probably happened, right? And you should get an alarm that like, hey, you've got a large snapshot change going on. So again, that's something, I've got an RFE in it. I've got an RFE for that into our engineering right now. But it is something that you guys have today. If you've got a little bit of understanding about, how to create a SQL query, and then you've got some sort of monitoring app that's able to do that kind of logging and then data mining. It's very easy to set up, and it's pretty useful. So when we're monitoring snaps, again, unique size, total size. Another thing to be really cognizant of as we're creating protection groups, and again, getting back into some limitations of the product and some things we can and can't do, we want to be cognizant of the number of snapshots that we have in a single protection group. Okay, so you notice that most of these PGs have under 100 snapshots. This top guy here, I've got 262 snaps, and I've got one being VSS. This particular snapshot, or this particular protection group, will be a little bit of a problem, and it's actually the replica that's going on right now. This will be a little bit of a problem when we do replication. And it's by design. So when I kind of talk through this, understand kind of the why we did this before you focus on the negative of the fact that it takes longer to replicate. So in a protection group, when we have 1 to 200 snapshots, we have the base data and the snapshot metadata all be packaged into basically one VM's worth of information. Okay, so when you replicate it, we're only having to do differential checks on, you know, the base snapshot, or sorry, not the base, but the snapshot before this one, and then the new snapshot that I'm adding. So when I do replication, I'm basically cloning that old snapshot, and then I'm replicating just the blocks that have changed, and I only have to do a comparison versus that last snapshot. At 201 snapshots in a single protection group, we start doing some extra validation, because now we've got a lot of data and we need to make sure that all of it's good. So what we do on our 201st snapshot is we do a full compare. So instead of validating the 201st snapshot against the 200th snapshot, we're now validating all of the data in the 201st snapshots against all 200 of the previous snapshots. And we're doing that for every snapshot after that. So 202nd, 203rd, 204th, 205th, 206th, et cetera, right? All the way out to 2000. We're doing that. We don't do that at the primary data site, or the primary site, because the primary site, all of that validation happens every 6 hours during garbage collection. So when we run the SR process, or the storage reclamation process, we do all that diff checking during that time. So it doesn't happen during a snapshot. It happens a little bit differently. But when we do replication, we do it. And we do it to validate the data, because we want to make sure that you have your data so that if you have to recover back in time, you can. So what we're recommending is that for production DVX systems, where you've got 2 sites of DVX and you're running prod at both and you're cross-site replicating, we're recommending, and by we, I specifically mean me, are recommending that you keep the total number of snaps in a single protection group under 200, okay? That doesn't mean total number of VMs. You could have 1,500 VMs in this protection group with 1 snap, and that would not be what we're talking about here. But if you have 10 VMs and you have 200 snapshots for those 10 VMs on the 201st, that's when we have to do the full compare. So just something to think about as you're cross-site replicating. Try to keep those total number of snaps under 200. If you're going out to cloud DVX, well, we do this whole compare. We still do the same thing with cloud DVX, but if you're using cloud DVX as an online archive, it kind of doesn't matter that we're doing that full compare, because cloud DVX doesn't have anything else to do with its time, right? It doesn't have to split IO services between doing your primary IO and doing this diff check, which is then making that replication take longer. It's focusing 100% of its resources on doing that diff check, and so therefore the replication is faster. So just be aware of that as you're building your protection groups, as you're building these out. That's kind of another thing in terms of best practices that we like to focus on, okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you guys have around protection groups. Next week, we're going to start talking about DR scenarios, both using regular DVX, just straight replication, as well as using control shift. And then the week after that, we're going to do some granular recovery. So we're going to get into using the granular file recovery, as well as do a couple different examples of some SQL and some Exchange recoveries using DVX for on-prem. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up chat, and I'm going to stop my share so I can actually read the chat. Okay. Oops, and why is Zoom not allowing me to find the dang chat window? Okay. Can you provide Yeah. So Chris, I will. I'm going to write up a blog on the PG reporting and what I'm doing to really get more specific on what I'm doing for that. Is basically I've got a PowerShell script that's going out, hitting the data node, capturing a JSON of JSON output of the snapshot status, and then basically converting that JSON into a SQL input, and then basically just having all of those points in SQL graph themselves. So it's not super sophisticated, but yeah, I can definitely I can share that out to you. Okay, IP address, DVX host, and password. What do we do if our servers are unable to talk to our Datrium DVX? Yeah, so Jeremy, if you have that IP, we do need the VSS to be able to talk to the management IP of the Datrium. So we would either need you to create a NAT or a firewall rule to be able to pass that traffic. One thing I can tell you, you just need to be able to talk to the floating IP. You don't need to be able to talk to all of the management IPs. It's just the float IP. And then the only two services that we need to pass are 443 for web, which is how we do the check-in to make sure that it's got the most up-to-date version of the VSS writer. And if it needs to upgrade itself, it will. And then we use port 8888 to do the actual transmission of the VSS data securely from the local VM to the host. So, for instance, I've got a customer. Don't know if John or John Bretto's on here. So Azion, one of the customers is on. They run a multi-tenancy environment where they do hosted web applications for their customers, and they're using the VSS for their SQL. But they're using firewall rules to allow the traffic for the VSS. Specifically to the Datrium management IP and nowhere else. So it's definitely doable. You just need to build security around it. It's cloud protection for only specific production servers. So yeah, so John, the scheduling the cloud protection only for production servers. So what you would do is you would create a dedicated protection group just for those servers that you want replicating to the cloud. And then you would specify replication. So you could break just a subset of the servers out to do cloud-based replication instead of having to do all of your servers. Alexander, yes, I'm going to publish this recording to my YouTube, and then I'll send you guys the link. You can allow traffic into that network. So I guess there's a solution we can back it up with meme. Yeah, that's possible. We've gotten around some of the CGIS requirements at places like Town of Addison, where we're not doing body cam footage on the Datrium itself. That's on separate storage, and so that was able to be something that we can do. But yeah, Jeremy, if you want to have a deeper discussion, that's something you and I should put on the calendar, and let's talk a little bit more about the architecture behind how we're transferring the VSS stuff. Because I agree, there are definitely places where it's just not going to happen. There's nothing we can do to make it work. But there are other places where I think we could probably set the appropriate security around it and make that work. So. Okay. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Cool. All right. Well, I thank everybody for being here today. Thank you for kind of bearing with me through the first one of these. Oh, hold on. Looks like we got Steve at GMP. Of each group after follow-up check install. Okay. Yeah. So Steve, you and I'll catch up. I'll reach out to you after this call. Just catch up about that. But yeah. So anyway, thank you everybody for again, bearing with me through this. Going forward in the future, definitely you know, we've got some topics planned, but if you guys have anything specifically that you want to dive more into, please feel free to email me and suggest stuff. If this Thursday time slot doesn't work for everybody, we figured lunch would be probably a good time to catch everyone. You could just have this up in the background, or you could listen to the recordings later. But if this isn't working for you, just let me know how we can improve it. And with that, I'm gonna give you the rest of your day back, and hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend if I don't talk to you.
Thanks, Cameron.